This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, January 14th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Ugandans are voting Thursday in a presidential election pitting long-term leader Yoweri Museveni against an opposition galvanized by Bobi Wine, a popular singer. Voting began late at some polling stations visited by Reuters after ballot papers did not arrive on time. Lines increased at many stations as midday approached, and soldiers and police in rough gear patrolled the capital. The East African country of 46 million people is under an internet blackout after the communications regulator ordered telecoms operators to suspend services, according to Uganda's largest operator, South African telecoms company, MTN Group. Some voters say they feared the security forces but were determined to vote. There has been more campaign violence than in previous turbulent elections as security forces cracked down on gatherings of opposition supporters. Meanwhile, tensions remain high in Uganda Thursday as voters cast their ballots in the country's presidential election. Africa 54 managing editor Vincent McCory has more.
Musician-turned-politician Bobi Wine is the leading opposition candidate challenging President Yoweri Museveni, who has been in power for nearly 35 years. Wine, whose real name is Robert Chagulanyi, is one of the first opposition politicians to channel the grievances of young people into a viable challenge, and this has rattled the ruling National Resistance Movement Party, according to political analysts. Uganda has one of Africa's youngest populations, with almost 80% of the population under age 30, meaning the majority of Ugandans were born after Museveni took power in 1986, following a 5-year guerrilla war. On Wednesday, the United States canceled the observation of Uganda's presidential election because most of its accreditation requests were denied, and said Thursday's vote would lack accountability and transparency, according to Reuters. Uganda is a Western ally and is considered a stabilizing force in a region where war has plagued some of its neighbors. Uganda also contributes the biggest contingent of an African Union force fighting Islamist insurgents in Somalia. Vincent McCory, VOA News.
Ugandan fishermen says dead fish are washing up on the shore at Uganda's Lake Victoria without a clear cause. Nazanin Moshiri reports.
Piles of dead fish are washing ashore at Uganda's Lake Victoria, and without a clear cause, according to the local fishing community. Uganda's Ministry of Agriculture said on Sunday that a usual phenomenon caused by hypoxia may have led to the deaths. Although people in the area told Reuters the death rate was much higher than in the past. Teddy Nagadia is a fishmonger in Kigungu.
The lake has become very polluted. That may also be one of the causes. Our children swim in the water sometimes. Mostly the young ones go swimming without their parents' knowledge. Now we fear the water they swim in is what is killing the fish. We don't know the cause. We do not know how hard it is going to become and where we will end up.
Over the last few years, agricultural chemicals from industry, farms and settlements near Lake Victoria have put stress on the environment and the people. Amos Wemanya is a campaigner for Greenpeace Africa.
All these stressors are affecting the lake. They are also affecting the 3 million livelihoods that depend on this resource.
The Ministry of Agriculture ruled out poisoning, saying only the Nile perch species have been affected by the phenomenon. In a statement, it said, that it is suspected the recent storms on the lakes cause mixing of the different waters, thereby reducing the oxygen levels, and that further tests are being conducted to determine the definitive reason behind the deaths.
Nazanin Moshiri of Reuters filed that report. Rebels attacked the Central African Republic capital of Bangui Wednesday in an escalation of violence following the presidential election last month. Authorities say President Faustin Archange Touadéra's army, with the aid of Russian and Rwandan troops alongside United Nations security forces, repelled the attacks. The attack is the closest offensive to the capital since Touadéra declared victory on December 27th in the election that rebels are calling fraudulent. Until Wednesday, attacks carried out by rebels were sporadic and far from the capital. France has thrown its support behind Touadéra, rejecting claims that the election was fraudulent. The United Nations has confirmed that one Rwandan peacekeeper was killed in Wednesday's attack. As cases of COVID-19 surge daily, surpassing levels seen in the first wave of the pandemic, South African restaurant workers continue to feel the brunt of tight lockdown regulations imposed by governments to slow the spread of the virus. Suraj Ali reports.
South Africa's hospitality workers must continue to clear tables, close doors and lock up restaurants by 9 p.m. in accordance with tighter lockdown restrictions imposed by the government to slow the spread of the virus.
We have recorded nearly 190.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has said that level 3 restrictions would be extended for the safety of the country.
More than 4,000.
Restaurant owners and associations across the country have been pleading for leniency since the start of the outbreak. The sector continues to suffer from permanent closures and loss of livelihoods. Hannah Moyo is a restaurant manager.
We still have hope things are going to change, although it all depends on how people handle themselves and how people are taking this whole COVID thing. Because the reason why we have a hard lockdown is because of the numbers that are surging every day. So that will mean people will lose jobs either, everyone, including me. That will be sad news.
South Africa is the continent's worst affected country. It's seen a rise in cases driven by a new virus variant that is believed to be more contagious. President Ramaphosa said earlier this week that the country had secured 20 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines, which would be delivered mainly in the first half of the year.
Suraj Ali of Reuters filed that report. Racing against a surge in COVID-19 death toll, the United States is releasing all available doses of the coronavirus vaccine and has instructed states to immediately begin vaccinating Americans 65 and older and adults with medical conditions. The U.S. Baxawida Kuswara has this story.
This mass vaccination facility in Manhattan, New York, has the capacity to vaccinate 10,000 people every 12 hours. But with the current state allocation of 300,000 doses per week, there are simply not enough vaccines.
We're going to need more vaccines. We consider this a wartime mobilization, in that lives are on the line every minute of every day.
Meanwhile, other states like Pennsylvania and New Jersey cannot administer their vaccine supply quickly enough. The Defense Department said more than 29 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine have been delivered nationwide. But according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, only 9 million shots have been administered as of Tuesday.
You need somebody to give the vaccine. You need a place to give the vaccine. And then you need the electronic infrastructure to schedule, to do all the scheduling and communication. That includes education about who should and shouldn't get the vaccine, side effects, and monitoring. What we have seen so far has been varying models of who provides that.
Earlier this week, the federal government said it will release all available doses of the vaccine instead of holding half in reserve for second doses. It also released new guidelines on who can get the shot.
We are telling states they should open vaccinations to all people over age 65 and over, and all people under age 65 with a comorbidity with some form of medical documentation as defined by governors.
President-elect Joe Biden has pledged to deliver 100 million shots in his first 100 days, beginning January 20th. He emphasized equity in how vaccines are distributed, particularly to poor people and minorities, who most often hold vulnerable jobs such as supermarket cashiers and bus drivers. But so far, there is not enough data on the demographics of vaccine recipients.
If you don't have that data, then you're really just walking blind. And what we know from the historical experience of this country is that if we are not looking specifically at populations that are at risk, then they ultimately get left out.
On Tuesday, the U.S. reported its highest number of COVID-19 deaths in one day, 4,327, according to Johns Hopkins University. 380,000 Americans have died from the coronavirus, with 23 million cases nationwide. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
Israel is amid an impressive COVID vaccination program, but next door, the Palestinian Authority has not yet begun to vaccinate its population. As Linda Gradskin reports from Jerusalem, some human rights organizations are calling on Israel to distribute vaccines there as well.
In the West Bank and Gaza Strip, there are almost 150,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, although health officials believe the actual number is much higher. The Palestinian Authority has now signed agreements with several international companies to get vaccines, including the Russian Sputnik vaccine, which the Palestinian Ministry of Health has just approved for emergency use.
The Health Ministry signed an agreement with 4 companies to import the vaccine. The shipments will arrive consecutively over the next 2 months. We will start vaccinating the medical teams, elderly residents, patients, until we vaccinate 70% of the residents in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and Jerusalem.
But until those vaccines arrive, there is concern that the pandemic will continue its rapid spread, especially in the poor and densely populated Gaza Strip. International and nonprofit groups say that Israel has an obligation to provide vaccines to the Palestinians.
So Israel is responsible for the welfare of all of the people living under its control, whether that be in Israel or in the West Bank and Gaza, where it is still an occupying power. Israel wants the Palestinian Authority to assume all of the burdens of sovereignty without having all of the benefits.
But some political analysts cite the 1995 Oslo Accords addendum, which states that Israel is obligated to help the Palestinians only if they specifically request help, which they have not yet done.
In addition to spelling out Israel's obligations to be helpful, it also says that the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian health system have an obligation to coordinate with Israel. And that coordination is what triggers the obligation to be helpful. The Palestinian Authority has to ask Israel for assistance and in specific ways has to invite Israel in, and that triggers Israel's obligation to then provide that help.
Even if the Palestinians do ask Israel for assistance, their health system lacks the special freezers for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which Israel has bought and could supply. Linda Gradstein for VOA News, Jerusalem.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover during the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, a Nigerian social enterprise aims to stop gender-based violence through technology. We'll be right back.
Is about more than just sitting here and talking about women's issues. It's about listening to them
and bringing their opinions to the table and making sure their voices are heard.
Because our lived experiences, our stories, and our voices will help shape the next generation.
Welcome back to Africa 54. The Democratic majority U.S. House impeached President Donald Trump Wednesday, charging him with inciting an insurrection, attempting to overturn the Electoral College vote count at the U.S. Capitol last week. As VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson reports, the trial in the U.S. Senate will not start until after President-elect Joe Biden is inaugurated next week.
In the same chamber they evacuated just a week ago to escape pro-Trump protesters attempting to overturn the election of Joe Biden as president. The U.S. House of Representatives impeached President Donald Trump by a vote of 232 to 197.
Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors.
The single article of impeachment charging Trump with inciting that insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th.
If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
After Vice President Pence informed House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that he would not invoke a U.S. constitutional provision temporarily removing Trump from power, the House voting to impeach in a heavily locked down Capitol protected by the U.S. National Guard.
The president saw the insurrectionists not as the foes of freedom, as they are, but as a means to a terrible goal, the goal of his personally clinging to power, the goal of thwarting the will of the people, the goal of ending in a fiery and bloody clash nearly 2.5 centuries of our democracy.
Most House Republicans argued the president's actions did not rise to the level of impeachment, but some acknowledged his role in the riot.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding.
Now the first president in U.S. history to be impeached twice, Trump has defended his speech at the rally before the riot. But he condemned violence on his behalf Wednesday.
No true supporter of mine could ever endorse political violence.
10 Republicans did vote to impeach the president.
My vote to impeach our sitting president is not a fear-based decision,
including high-ranking Representative Liz Cheney, who condemned Trump's actions as the greatest betrayal ever by a president. The impeachment now moves to a trial in the U.S. Senate, where some Republicans could join Democrats to convict the president.
If we see a huge and ugly attack on the Capitol in the coming days, then I think there will be even more energy for conviction. If in fact, however, the tensions go down, then it's possible that the energy could go away and senators decide no, they don't want to go as far as convicting President Trump.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell announcing that trial would not begin until at least the day before Biden is inaugurated, possibly stalling his early agenda during the pandemic.
That'll be unfortunate for Biden and unfortunate for the country, mostly because the one thing we are all waiting on is we're waiting on getting money for COVID-19.
In a poll taken after Wednesday's riot, 56% of registered voters said Trump was responsible for the violence at the Capitol, and a slight majority said he should be removed from office. If convicted, Trump would be barred from ever again running for federal office. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
Colombia is warning potential migrants from Venezuela about an increase in child sexual trafficking and exploitation cases in Colombia. VOA's Christina Smith has this report.
Along the Colombia and Venezuela border, authorities say human trafficking is a growing problem. In Colombia, cases jumped 23% between 2015 and 2019, and Colombian officials say most of the victims are Venezuelan refugees and migrants. Camilo Andrés Domínguez Cantillo says he was abused as a child in Colombia and then fell into a human trafficking network as a minor.
I fell into a prostitution network in Cartagena de Indias. Suddenly, due to the problems I had with my family, they didn't understand me and I didn't have their support. Then I met a person who was trafficking boys and girls.
Mayerlin Vergara Perez is the regional coordinator of the Renacer Foundation, which helps sex trade victims. She works in the Colombian city of Riohacha, near the border with Venezuela, and says she's seen the rise in child exploitation cases and the lasting impact it has on children.
When a child is a victim of sexual exploitation, there's a profound impact, not only physically, because there are sexually transmitted diseases, but there are psychological problems. There are great, deep emotional problems.
About 90 kilometers from Riohacha, Luz Marina is a community leader in what is known as La Pista, an area where hundreds of Venezuelan families have found a makeshift refuge. She is working to keep kids here safe.
We want our children to study and not get lost because they arrive late at night. They don't look for anything good in the streets. They seek to be raped.
According to UN Refugee Agency, the number of Venezuelan refugees and migrants in La Guajira exceeds 155,000 people, and experts here say gender-based violence is on the rise. The number of victims of transnational trafficking rose by 20% in the first 4 months of 2020, and most of them were young women between 10 to 30 years old, according to the UN Office of Drugs and Crimes.
We have formed a group of 90 community leaders who are currently in the field, observing women who are exposed to risk situations, whether women from Venezuela or from here.
Right now, the only help for victims is coming from organizations like the UN Refugee Agency, Enlace Mujer, and Renacer. The organizations are working in together closely to address the needs of Venezuelan refugees. Cristina Caicedo-Smith, VOA News.
In our technology report, according to the United Nations Women's Campaign Against Gender-Based Violence, 13 to 45% of women in sub-Saharan Africa experience some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. But Take Her, a Nigerian social enterprise, aims to change that narrative through technology and innovation by applying tech solutions towards societal problems, mainly as they affect women. Africa 54 technology correspondent Paul Ndiho spoke to Chioma Agwebo, Executive Director, Trafficking in Abuja, Nigeria.
Chioma Agwebu, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much, Paul, for having me.
You run this incredible organization where you try to teach women, younger women, how to get into the tech space. Maybe help me understand what is it exactly that you do.
TechHer is a social enterprise that focuses on strengthening the voices of women using technology. And we have a simple theory of change that says if women learn or see ways in which technology, when applied to their lives, can enable them, right? So helps them be more effective, they'll pass it on to their children as seamlessly or as smoothly as they pass on religion or culture. And so for us, the whole idea is how do we show women these little bits of technology? And across our, the three different strands of our work, so whether it's digital literacy or tech for governance or community, every single day we try to reach yet another woman who is not directly affected by the STEM advocacy that typically goes towards children. So there's a lot of advocacy for young girls to get involved in science, technology, engineering, and math, but there's not that much for women who are out of school. So let's say people above the age of 18. So TechHer, we primarily focus on people above the age of 18, of course, women.
So how do you find these women?
When we do digital literacy programs, for instance, depending on the partner we're working with, we might put out a call and ask people if they're interested in certain skills or in certain, things that we want to teach them. For Tech for Governance, it focuses on applying technology to societal problems. So I'll give you a quick example. Look at the state of emergency GBV movement, which TechHer convened in June of 2020 to respond to the rising cases of sexual and gender-based violence in Nigeria. And what we did was bring these incredibly talented and excellent young people together. We started a small coalition, and using that network in Abuja, we were able to not only advocate across 7 states in Nigeria, so holding physical, marches to the state commissioners of police office, but also we engaged the legislature, we engaged the Nigerian Governors Forums, etc. We wouldn't have been able to do all of this coordination if we weren't applying some sort of technology.
You brought up a very good point, and maybe let's go back to the sexual violence thing that you alluded to. Sexual violence is a huge problem across Africa. Where you are in Nigeria, a lot of women who go through that are even scared to come and speak out publicly about what happened to them. So at what extent is those skills you're giving them in terms of how to use technology maybe empowering those women?
We wanted to be practical, right? And so we hosted a self-defense class, and it just brought a bunch of women together. And we worked with some martial artists, but also some, self-defense trainers, and they taught women how to defend themselves. Again, working with a bunch of people, we formed a little group much earlier last year. And what we started doing was collating incidents of sexual violence reported online. So when we then started, state of emergency GBV in June, we were able to say, these are the ways in which sexual violence present. And these are the reasons why you must believe women when they speak up.
How extensive is your program? Do you reach out to rural women, or you right now focused on maybe the elite women in Abuja, women who live within maybe the suburbs of Abuja?
It's a mixture of both. I think that, but one thing I'm very excited about is we've been very intentional with reaching out to children, which teaches technology to children. And instead, we came up with a simple idea to create a pack of cards that mirror cards that, a card game that we all played as children. And on those cards, we then placed technology information. So there are 5 categories of cards that you see. And there's one that's, careers in tech. There's another one that's online safety tools. There's another one that's, tech terminologies. And then there's one about Nigeria fun facts, and then Nigerian heroines, because we also wanted to give them a bit of culture. And so what would happen is we'd go into the schools, do a bit of an introduction, and then we'll set the kids into groups and have them play. And as they play, they start to ask questions. And that was just level 1 of the engagement. So it's not just, city women. We have done, events with people in the cities, but we're also very intentional when it comes to reaching out to people who hitherto would not have had any access to technology or technology information.
Chioma, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That was Africa 54's tech correspondent Paul Ndiho speaking to Chioma Agwebo, Executive Director, Checkering in Abuja, Nigeria. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.